Hi, everyone. My name is Alexei. I'm a program manager here at UMass M2D2. I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. It's co-hosted by UMass Lowell and UMass Chan Medical School, and of course, M2D2. I'll turn it over to Ilsa, who is going to be our moderator for the discussion today. And Ilsa, I will let you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation to be involved in this topic, which is very important and is challenging for several different stakeholders on lots of different sides of the medical device and the healthcare industry. And we have a great set of speakers today. Just in our pre-meeting, we were just saying is we might not have all the answers for you today, right? There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of information out there on what's happening with Medicaid, but we'll do our best. We'll give our perspectives from the world that we work in and the experiences that we've had working with products, patients, and companies in this space. As Alexei mentioned, I'm Ilsa Wieback. I'm a Vice President of Commercialization and Marketing at Simbex. And we work with medical technology, sports technology, and health technology companies to develop new products and bring them everything from napkin sketch already all the way to ready for manufacturing. And on the commercial side, we have expertise in regulatory, quality, and market intelligence. But I believe they asked me to moderate this session because also reimbursement is a real big piece of the questions that a lot of our clients have and many companies have out there is how is this going to get paid for? And really asking those questions early in the development process, having as much information as you can that feeds into the decision making and the strategy for your products. Not only helps set you up for ultimate commercial success, but along the ways helps to attract the right advisors, the right investors, and a good team to make sure that you understand the full story surrounding any product that's in development. So I'm going to do my best and have the opportunity to share some expertise from my colleagues that have joined with us today. Um, and those of you, many people have been on webinar setups at this point, but if you haven't been before, just a reminder that there is a Q&A function that is at the bottom of your screen. That kind of replaces the chat in a webinar setup. If you ask those questions, feel free to enter them as we go. If it's a question directed to a particular person, feel free to put their name in there. If it's a general question, you can just put it as a general question. And we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the conversation. Um, also we'll try to to open those questions up to all of our panelists because we are representing several different directions related to the healthcare industry today. With that overview, again, welcome all to our conversation to really understand how what the Medicaid landscape looks like today and how it is really going to impact new technology in the future. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of go around the room based on who I see on my screen and ask each person to introduce yourselves, tell us who you are and your current role, your current company. But then also, we'd love for our audience as well to hear a little bit about your story related to related to Medicaid and your perspective on sort of the current slice of the world as you see it today. I'll start with Melanie, if you wouldn't mind going first. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ilsa. I'm Melanie True-Hills. I am an atrial fibrillation patient, though I have been AFib-free for just over 20 years now as a result of having a procedure. I decided that once I became AFib-free, I wanted to help other people find their solution too. So I started a nonprofit patient advocacy organization called stopafib.org. And our mission is to support people living with AFib, not just the patients, but their family members and caregivers as well. And so we are global in scope. We have people who come to us from all around the globe. And we also have an annual atrial fibrillation patient conference. So I have no personal experience with Medicaid, but there's a lot of experience in our AFib patient community. And so, we have a great deal of concern as to what are going to be the ramifications for the AFib patient community. And so rather than spending 5 minutes talking about that, why don't we come back to that, Ilsa, once we've gotten the introductions done? Thanks.
Thank you. David. Oh, we have two Davids. One was Dave and one was David. So Dr. McManus, I guess, can go first.
I also thank you for inviting me to join. My name is David McManus. I am a physician and I work at what's called a disproportionate safety net hospital system, which means that it takes care of at least 40%, let's put it this way, it takes care of a very large proportion of its patients have Medicaid. And as a consequence, I will be giving perspectives on the potential impact of Medicaid cuts to health systems and to provider groups that take care of Medicaid patients. In addition, I'm the PI of the Center for Advancing Point of Care Technologies and can bring a perspective, having worked with smaller companies that we try to find with this NIH grant and help develop, who are trying to develop solutions for patients who either live in rural areas or face health challenges, including those covered by Medicaid, and can give some thoughts from that perspective as well. So thank you for inviting me today.
Great, thank you. And we'll do the other David Fogel.
So hi, I'm Dave Fogel. I know I actually on the invite, I talked about my day job, splitting the CFOs, but probably more applicable here is that I've been a member of Mass Medical Angels for a little over 15 years now. So I've seen a lot. I'm a member of Mass Medical, as I mentioned. I've been a member of two other groups over the years, Beacon Angels, Thai Angels, but right now I'm just into more recently I joined TBD Angels about 4 or 5 months ago. So I've been in that kind of realm for a long time. I do teach at Northeastern. I teach entrepreneurial finance. I've been there 6 years now. So I've got it from the academic side, the investor side, and the consulting side. So my day job is I have a firm. There's 12 of us in the firm called Swift and CFOs. We do CFO services, accounting and financial services and fundraising, everything for basically a startup community. So I'm hopefully going to give you at least a viewpoint as to how all this affects investors and that attitude and well, I certainly have an attitude, so I'll try not to bring it too hard, but that's my perspective.
All right, thank you. And Brian.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Brian Nolan. I'm the founder and CEO of My Biometry. My Biometry is a non-invasive monitoring company for patients with chronic respiratory disease. So that's asthma and COPD. We make a diagnostic breath test that measures patients' airway inflammation, and then we use that data to predict whether they're going to have an attack or not. And you get about a 20-day heads up before it happens, and then we build services around that of, okay, now you know you're at risk. What are you actually going to do about it? So I can come at this from the perspective of product development and financing. One of the biggest patient cohorts that has asthma are pediatric Medicaid patients. So it's absolutely a huge population and a really big problem that we need to address. So we've thought about how do we build the product and the solution in the company with that particular patient group in mind.
All right, thank you. And then last, but certainly not least, Lee Washington, thanks for joining. Good to see you again.
Thanks so much, Ilsa. Great to join you. And of course, my throat is tickling, so you may see me cough every now and then. I'll try to mute, but it's not anything anyone said, I promise. I'm Lee Washington, Senior Medical Director at Aetna. I've been with Aetna now for almost 20 years. I'm a family doc by background, started about 30 years ago. My primary focus at Aetna is with municipalities and large corporations from the standpoint of medical coverage of their employees and population health solutions. I do have a background actually also preceding my time at Aetna as a medical director of an FQHC. But you might ask, given my current experience, what is my interest in Medicaid? And what we've seen with a lot of employers, municipalities, and corporations is that you have dependents that many times may cycle on to Medicaid, or you have even employees that may cycle on and off Medicaid. And so, one of the things we do where we have a critical mass of membership is we look at approaches to building that healthcare infrastructure, which is going to benefit patients regardless as to what their insurance happens to be at the time. And when we talk about cuts in Medicaid, one of the big things that we have to look at is the idea of disruptive innovation. So I don't know if any other folks have read Christensen, but I'm guessing the answer is yes. But the notion of innovating for low resource populations that would otherwise not get the service, and the innovation turns out to be so successful that even high resources organizations and environments want to pay for that innovation as well. I do just have to give a shout out to Melanie's comments about atrial fibrillation. So I started out at Aetna almost 20 years ago with a subsidiary called Active Health, and we build clinical intelligence into the care engine. And one of our, we have thousands of care considerations. Typically, it takes about 5% off of the spend as a result of preventing adverse events. But one of our flagship care considerations, or several actually, are tied to atrial fibrillation and preventing the stroke-related complications of that. So just wanted to give a shout out to you and the work you're doing. And thank you again for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. And Lee, since you're on or off mute, I guess I should say, maybe I can ask you to talk a little bit more about the kinds of programs that you can put in place. And you talked about how to help municipalities and large corporations understand their medical coverage and their population health. Are these programs that you're kind of proactively trying to offer to them, or are you asking them to create programs for their populations, or how does that dynamic work?
Yeah, so primarily, and I'll start out the response, and good timing, by the way, on the question. I'm not coughing right now. I'll just start out with a comment about, there's a quote. I've said it's Einstein. If you don't know who said it, just say Einstein. It sounds good. But the quote is, I not only use all the brains that I have, but all that I can borrow. And so our approach to building out population health solutions typically involves about 17 or so uh, give or take, clinicians. Many times they're physicians that have deep experience in a particular subject. And I say we because I was a part of that group before I became more externally facing, but we're constantly combing the medical literature, building algorithms that find gaps in care and close gaps in care through strategic communication with the physicians and the member. We're also, and I love what my doc colleague who created the inflammation measurer, I'll call it. How's that for butchering your invention? For proactively identifying asthma, because part of what we do is we also look at the likelihood that someone's going to be admitted to the hospital in the next 9 months with about 90% accuracy. I can talk to you. I don't want to bore people, and I can't see the audience, so I can't tell if people are sleeping, but I don't want to bore you with what those statistics mean. But the idea is that we're able, through our algorithm, to find people who are entering that acute stage before they get admitted and proactively outreach to them. That's a very high accuracy if you compare it to what's in the literature. So typically, these are solutions that we build as a result of a clinical team inside of Aetna. And there also are external innovators that we work with. So we're doing some work with states. I started out my comments by talking about the critical mass of our involvement that helps us to position in a way that we can build infrastructure and drive that disruptive innovation. We're partnering with physician organizations to explore unique approaches to the maternity health crisis in rural communities, the primary care crisis, obesity, and there are some innovators out there doing some phenomenal things that we try to bring to different geographies that we're in. And I do have involvement across the country. So fortunately, I'm able to find best practices in different communities and try to help spread them.
And is your work, is it really tied to Medicaid, or is it Medicare, general insurance pressures, ability for people to self-pay? Is it all tied together, or are there particular aspects for Medicaid that come into play as you're looking across that population?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so I think there's a multifaceted answer. One is just to put some context around it. When I was at Active Health, we had what we would call a multi-payer solution or a payer agnostic solution with our clinical intelligence tool called the Care Engine. And that, in fact, was a tool that was used by a number of competitors of Aetna, frankly, in the insurance space. And so applying that question that you asked in terms of whether we're focused on how our solutions may apply to Medicaid and others. What we try to do is create solutions that have implications for a broad spectrum of people, commercial, Medicaid, and even in some cases uninsured. And by driving those solutions, we're able to make an impact on the population health at large. Now, what I'll give you as an example, one of the things that we spent a lot of time on was identifying social determinants and risks tied to social determinants. We found an incredible amount of concordance between social risk and clinical risk. I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone on the call. But what we've done is really invested in trying to close those social risk gaps. So in some cases, there can be connections to resources, social services resources. Frankly, we've made investment in affordable housing so that, that's more of an infrastructure investment that helps the entire community. And I personally have had conversations with people who I would look at as thought leaders in that space, like Purpose-Built Communities, which is a not-for-profit that's doing really extraordinary work with housing-related types of challenges. So while I'm focused on primarily, if you look at technically, I'm focused on folks with private insurance. I really try to focus on a suite of solutions that have implications for everybody, covered, uncovered, Medicaid, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And
Sure.
David McManus, that sounds like it kind of dovetails with what you're working on, maybe from a different direction. So, be interesting to hear your thoughts on, sort of the population health, maybe the rural side, and that over-indexed program that you're working on. Can you tell us some more about that?
Sure. I think given I work in Massachusetts, and our hospital systems are still recovering from the collapse of the Steward for-profit system, and state
Can you tell a
governments.
little about that for maybe people that don't know what that means?
Sure. So this was national news, but there was a for-profit system called Stewart that had taken over from a Caritas Christi, which was a Catholic hospital network throughout New England, I think 8 or 9 hospitals, and suddenly collapsed. And the state of Massachusetts and other states stepped in to try to save as many of the hospitals, many of which were in areas of high Medicaid populations. And some closed, some moved into other healthcare systems, but the overall impact has been really significant and strained the healthcare systems in Massachusetts, particularly those in the middle and western part of the state, the more rural areas, and the more Medicaid oriented population served by those hospital system. Obviously, this is in the national context of discussions about Medicaid cuts, particularly cuts to hospitals that receive supplemental funds or dish payments. So the overall tenor right now within healthcare is a very chilling effect of these changes. Now, to date, there have not been cuts, but as you're planning for the future and partnering with companies or trying out new technologies, you're much less likely to encounter hospital leadership, clinic leadership, or no one's IT or tech budget went up. Let's put it that way, in a safety net hospital. And so what I just would say is from a today boots on the ground perspective, while there still are partnerships and new technologies being evaluated and implemented, they really, including for women, children, who are really the major impact, at least within our hospital system of Medicaid cuts. There is less investment. The investments are very much focused on cost reduction, on revenue creation in some cases, but there's very little. There are very few new large-scale programs or investments being made in these areas because folks are very much afraid of what, getting more exposure into Medicaid would lead to even greater financial risk for the nonprofit systems in the region. And I can't speak for example, in Massachusetts, they're big, academic systems like the Partners MGB system. I can't speak to what they're experiencing, but certainly within rural safety net hospitals, which were already struggling, are closing, and that's leaving more and more people in what I will call healthcare deserts, and really seeking. In some cases, it's closing practices. People are turning away from accepting Medicaid, Medicare, and I think it's we're seeing all sorts of disruption around that, including Amazon One, transactional stuff, online, all kinds of impacts. So happy to go more into it, but I'm conscious of sharing the lectern. I just will say it's had a chilling effect and very, very strategic, but still investments being made in tech implementations. But I would say there's a hesitancy to bite off big new projects, and you really have to have a compelling argument for cost reduction if you want to play in that sort of Medicaid innovation space with the healthcare system as a stakeholder or buyer.
Yeah, so that's interesting because kind of looking at it from a program perspective, these organizations are trying to take what they have, catch up from the challenges that they've recently experienced, and then also predict what's going to happen in the future, right? So it's sort of that triumvirate of challenges. And Brian, as you were developing your product, knowing you're going to a pediatric population, with some of the current challenges, those current dynamics that we heard David go through, can you reflect back maybe a little on your development process and how you thought about that landscape?
Sure. So we're in sort of a unique and somewhat fortunate position in that there's already a CPT code for reimbursement based on the tests that we were performing. And it's not particularly a restrictive code, so being able to build that test for home monitoring is not one of the restrictions on it. So that creates kind of a unique opportunity. Well, the first one is just from a product perspective, you kind of know what your target is, right? You know what the cost structure has to be in order to actually survive in the space. So part of the product requirements, and it went back, all the way into the initial design of the device and the sensor and the solution, was understanding what the cost structure had to be. You had to be at X price in order to be profitable at X reimbursement. It also creates sort of a secondary unique opportunity in that it creates revenue opportunities for the physicians who are billing the code, because the reimbursement is actually quite large on a per test basis. And that's big enough that we can share that reimbursement with the physician. So to Dr. McManus's point, we're trying to create opportunities where you save money by preventing attacks, and you create revenue opportunities for the hospital and for the providers, so that they can so that it becomes sustainable essentially. And that's sort of how we thought about it, both from a product perspective, but also a business model perspective, from the beginning. So understanding that, in order to address this patient population, it has to be sustainable. And really the two, fee for service or capitated or like risk-based contracts, you need to be able to play in both of those types of markets. And we've designed the product to be flexible so that we could do that.
Yeah, and there are, with your product and other products that are out there that might be available, but if patients don't necessarily have access to those products, or they can't get the care, or they can't get to the clinicians that they're looking for, there's still that challenge, right? In the rural areas, or with a pediatric population, is it maybe more challenging for them to access the care pathways that they need?
I think what's unique is that we can deliver. So basically, the test that we're doing is predominantly done in specialist offices. So by giving this to people at home and making the data available to their primary care physician, you basically get a scalable sort of upscaling of clinical skills, right? So you deliver specialist level care, or at least specialist level monitoring in the community at people's homes. And it's all monitored remotely. So we can see who's trending in the wrong direction. It's structured in a way that the physicians don't actually have to pay attention to it. We pay attention to it and alert the physician when something's going on. So I think we try and address the remote part of it that way, is that you're really using technology to scale up how you monitor patients and track whether they're at risk beforehand, so that you can actually deliver some kind of intervention, knowing that you don't want to be annoying and bother the doctors too much.
Yeah, definitely, definitely be doctors' friends rather than annoying for sure. Yeah, and so that's a great example where, there was a kind of a gap in care, uh, an opportunity existed, and say like, so let's bring a way of doing this better, in more cost-effective or more, descaled fashion in order to provide that care to the patients. Um, and Melanie, you were sharing a story about how you might know what you need to do from a medical perspective, but you might not have access to it. Maybe there's, that innovation hasn't taken place in all of the areas that we really need help in the rural setting. So appreciate it if you could share the story that you shared with us earlier.
Sure. It's a real problem for those who are rural and on Medicaid, um, typically lower socioeconomic status. They may not have access to care, and we're getting less care now. The rural situation is particularly bad, with rural hospitals hemorrhaging money, some shutting down, some diminishing their services. We had a wonderful healthcare system out here in our rural county. We're in rural North Texas, about 2 hours out of Dallas. And about a week ago, my husband had a medical issue. Our county hospital was purchased last December by a hospital in another county, and now we're just a satellite outpost. And so a lot of the tools that used to be there are no longer there. A lot of the services are no longer available. And so, with my husband having an emergency, instead of driving 20 minutes to our county seat, now this was like almost midnight on a Saturday night, I had to drive the dark, windy country roads about an hour to the next county over to a hospital there that had a better equipped emergency room. And so he was admitted to the hospital there and was there for several days. And, I was having to go back and forth to get things for him and so forth. And so not having our local resources that we used to have is a huge disadvantage. And it's only going to get worse, because with less Medicaid payments to these rural hospitals, we're going to see more and more of this. And so that's really problematic for those of us that are rural. And I had transportation, but think about some of the rural folks who are lower socioeconomic status and maybe don't have good transportation to some of the, farther away centers in order to have access to care. So access to care in rural communities is getting worse rather than better as a result of cuts and just because of the financial situation that they're in.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry he had to go through that, but lucky he has you that knows what to do to get his care covered. But that does highlight the need for relatively easy access to care, right? We heard about the care deserts, and there's lots of areas that people do have to drive several hours to get to any kind of care. And David, I'm curious your thoughts, David Fogel, on you know, hearing there's a need out there. There's patients that have conditions that need help. There are models that work well in the rural or remote monitoring landscape. Organizations are putting programs in place to try to advance the care in these different locations. But then from an investor perspective, you have to take all of that into consideration And on one hand, and this is me speaking, right? On one hand, I'd be like, we need to help these patients. Let's figure out how we can get them all the care they need. And then on the other hand, you're like, oh, but is this going to be a viable business opportunity? Can you share your thoughts on how, maybe how this all this comes together? As an angel, you're looking at um lots of different opportunities in lots of shapes and sizes, but at the end of the day, have to decide which ones are going to be a good product to make it out there.
Yeah, it does. It certainly makes it difficult. Because if you're looking at it strictly on the financial side, or at least as a financial decision, you're looking to make money. I mean, fundamentally as an angel investor, you're looking to make money. Most angel investors I know have that degree of that, but also want, it's funny, I was on a panel a couple weeks ago, an impact panel. And the way impact was described was, well, that's sort of different than your normal angel investor. But the way I seen it, at least in my realm, sorts, is that most angels really are impact investors.
Mm.
I mean, they're looking to do things that they normally wouldn't be doing, and they're looking to do some level of good. Now, are there other, angel investors that, are there a significant number that maybe, aren't necessarily thinking in terms of impact, of course. And I'm not so naive to suggest that. But at the same time, though, I think there's enough investors that do, really do think about impact and think about, okay, how are we moving, how are we moving the needle forward in terms of care, and even doing things for remote people. They may not be able to get the same kind of care, but at least, hopefully having some innovation that's a win-win for everybody
Mhm.
in a sense.
Yeah, and Brian, how do you think about the investor community, different kinds of funding strategies and other mechanisms that could come into play? Because you need to fund your company in order to provide strategies for rural or low resourced populations.
Yeah, I mean, we took a sort of a unique approach in that one of our largest investors happens to be an insurance company that covers a lot of Medicaid patients. So by having conversations with the chief medical officer there and just kind of understanding what kind of a problem that they're dealing with from a pediatric Medicaid perspective, we convinced them that what we're doing is something that could really help them as an organization. So they decided to do a relatively large investment and then also be our first customer. So enabling us to basically pilot the solution once we get a regulatory clearance with them to demonstrate that it works, and then we can start taking that to other states. They cover a number of states, and then in conjunction with that, we're going to the provider groups in those states and basically explaining what we're doing and saying, hey, there's an insurance company that's going to cover this. So that was sort of the approach we took was, go to the insurance company. And then when you're talking to other investors, they ask how you're going to address Medicaid. And now I have a pretty good response to that. And that, an insurance company made an investment to pilot the solution in their Medicaid population because they see it to be valuable. But I think the bottom line is investors want rational business models that can be reproducible and scale. So if you can figure out how to make that work in Medicaid, that's sufficient for pretty much any investor to make an investment decision. The flip side of that is, Medicaid's one small aspect of a very big healthcare pie. So there's plenty of other places that you can go from a business perspective that isn't Medicaid. So when you're talking to investors, if you don't have a good Medicaid story, I recommend not highlighting the Medicaid portion of it.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's somewhere around 23% of patients. So it's not like the whole story, right? But it's still
Yeah.
a decent chunk. But you do have the other 75-ish% to to cover.
I think the bigger part of it is something that Dr. McManus hit on, is that their attention and their budgets have changed, which impacts everybody that's selling something to a health system, not just somebody trying to sell into a Medicaid population.
Yeah.
I often think, you're not, when you're talking to insurance companies, you're competing with everything that they're looking at, regardless of, if they're hot on GLP-1s, you're competing with GLP-1s,
Yeah.
even if you have nothing to do with obesity. Same thing with Dr. McManus. If their attention is drawn to planning and making sure that, that they can be financially sustainable given all the cuts and all the crazy things happening, that, if I'm trying to sell a new orthopedic system to the hospital, that's got an impact on it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Lee, what do you think about that from from your perspective where, right, like your budget's a budget, right? If an organization, a community, an employer has a certain, bucket that they need to work with, and so, you know, I know with Dr. McManus saying that they have a higher proportion of those under-resourced patient population, but you only have so much to work with. How do you think about those dynamics in your role?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I will just say that to Brian's point, I think the memo did get out that insurance companies are a good investor because I think you talk to most insurance folks and they'll tell you that they're getting contacted all the time by entrepreneurs. But to your point in terms of how do you do this in an era of resource constraints, right? And how do you do it for arguably the population that's most resource constrained? And so I think there's several things. One is that a lot of people bring, so there's a few things. One is a lot of people sort of create a solution and then they go looking for a problem, which is sort of the backwards way to do it, right? So for sure, no one's going to invest in a solution that's looking for a problem. The other piece, though, is that to Brian's point, you're right. There are a lot of competing priorities and people have limited bandwidth. So you can only focus on so many things at once. So when you put those two things together, what becomes really important is how do you time getting in front of people at the right moment and who is the right person to get in front of? And I think while insurance executives certainly have a major role, it's important to keep in mind that from the perspective of insurance, what we do typically is we're at plan administrators for a lot of large employers who are ultimately the ones making the purchasing decision. And so what we see in communities, and kind of I'll go back to some of the statements I made before, where we have a critical mass of membership, is that in an ideal world, that conversation shifts from what do we want to do to manage trend year over year or to invest in population health year over year to how do we identify those most compelling problems that we can solve that span the entire population across payers and uninsured status. And when that conversation shifts, you change who your partners are that you're bringing in. So yes, it still includes insurance executives and employers, but it also includes physicians who are doing the frontline work, other folks who have that perspective from ground zero. And so you're really identifying problems and organically developing solutions. And in the best of best worlds, in a situation where these are being developed in very resource constrained environments, you're really being able to leverage that disruptive innovation to create something that's really compelling.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I think just a quick interjection. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Maybe I'll ask one more question of the group and then shift over to the first question we have there. And maybe start with Melanie, what Lee is saying, right? Like these populations are, there's increasing disparities with, what patients can do and their access to care. We have uncertainty in what's really going to happen with the Medicare, Medicaid, government access to programs. Do you have any, sort of advice or thoughts for organizations that are developing products that are trying to access or provide care to patients that would truly benefit from their technology, but have these concerns about being able to get to the right people at the right time?
I think it's really hard for patients necessarily to have access to new technologies unless their clinicians are providing them access to those new technologies. And so once they've had access, then they can do campaigns to get to Congress, to write CMS for Medicare and Medicaid. Access to these, to these new technologies. But it's really hard unless they're actually brought to the attention of the patients for patients to know that these are even available to them. So that's a real challenge. This is a little bit of a diversion, but I'd like to bring in something that I have a concern about.
Okay.
Related to patients, and that's this whole area of work requirements. It's important, we don't want people just, sitting at home and collecting, benefits, but work requirements can be very difficult for patients, especially for Medicaid patients. For our patients, the vast majority of atrial fibrillation patients are going to be seniors. And so they're exempt from the work requirements to start with. But we do have a lot of younger folks who have AFib, and they're not eligible for disability because they only have the AFib, and AFib is not usually considered a disabling condition unless they have other medical conditions alongside it. And so, they aren't eligible for Medicare, so they're not considered, or for Medicaid, and or for Medicaid if they're not working, and yet they may have a condition that is disabling to them. And if they're not able to access Medicaid because they're not working, because they're not up to working, they're not even eligible as medically frail. And so they won't even have access to the Affordable Care Act care that's out there. And so it's a little bit of a concern for those who are dealing with a condition that is disabling to them, and yet they're not considered medically disabled. And so they may not be able to keep their Medicaid if they're not able to work, volunteer, go to school, those kinds of things. And for many of them, it's not even possible. And that's just the AFib population. Across all of Medicaid, there are a lot of people that are struggling and suffering and under 65 and not really able to work. So this is going to be problematic for some of them. Certainly, there are a lot of people on Medicaid that are able-bodied and can work, but it's going to be a problem for a lot of people on Medicaid that really aren't able to work. If they're, if their heart rate shoots up to 200 beats a minute, and it's clocking along at that, and they're having a difficult time breathing, they're not really able to even think and work. And so that I think is going to be a problem for us going forward. So I wanted to raise that because I believe that is a concern in the patient community, is how am I going to keep my Medicaid if I can't work?
Yeah, and I'll open up to our panelists if anyone would like to respond to that, either to the idea that there's this swath of patients that might not be qualified to receive care anymore. Any advice on or thoughts on what companies can do or what individuals can do as they're thinking about changes in the future? Any thoughts on that? Or if not, maybe advice. Oh, Lee, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. One of the things that often happens with major changes in policies like we're experiencing now is that in this case, there certainly is going to be a reduced amount of resources. But I think what I'm also hearing as I talk to people in the industry is that there are going to be other resources to a lesser degree coming in from different sources. I think that it's important to make a compelling case for those because for a lot of those resources, the process may be competitive. It may vary in terms of one's ability to get those resources, depending on who your partners are, et cetera. But one of the aspects to going after those funds is to kind of one, I think is to identify problems like you just have and incorporate the solution into that, but also build in an infrastructural component so it's an investment that will continue to pay for itself over time because of cost reductions or improved ability to work for people who have disabilities. And along those lines, the other point I would just make is that a lot of times people think of the cost quality conundrum and the idea that quality investments tend to reduce costs, which generally is true. It's not always true, but it's generally true. But one thing that we often don't talk about is that when you've used quality to reduce costs, if you look at the productivity factor, generally the multiplier is 2 to 1 for greater productivity for every dollar you reduce cost by from a result as a result of improving quality. But for knowledge workers, that number can go way up, well beyond 2 to 1. So I just wanted to stress that as well as being another way to look at the return on investment.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
Happy to take another comment on that point. Otherwise, we can move to one of the questions.
I think I might add to what Lee just said. He had a number of really good points, but I think we've seen this in the past with disruptions. Thinking of COVID in the context of movement towards CMS covering telehealth and care in the home in very different and creative ways. And right now, for example, Mass Health is piloting a remote skilled nursing at home program. This is powered by a number of different assistive technologies and sensors. And so, I know I'm trying to put a silver lining on a distinctly not silver a scenario of Medicaid cuts, but we will see whether, NIH, this isn't happening in the vacuum, right? So you've got an NIH budget, which may be preserved, that might be a source of funding through SBIR and through other mechanisms for small businesses to innovate. You also see foundations stepping forward to try to address accessibility. But I think there will be opportunities to potentially stimulate innovations. Actually, right now we might have the fallacy that you could get to a doctor in a rural area. We're going to suffer no illusions to that effect if, in certain rural areas, at least in our region, in terms of Medicaid patients, and that at some point might force, acceptance, for example, of AI in the front end of healthcare decision making and triaging that previously we have not accepted. So I just would say that this might force things to a point where it's really just so unsafe for patients who are on Medicaid to maternal care in particular, is something I'm thinking a lot about, where it's just, I could see the politics forcing, real change in terms of how care is delivered. Or, to Brian's point about his system, like virtual rehabilitation programs are really, they're not adopted at the rate that I think they should be. Because we're kind of like, it's like a wanna do, or like maybe break even, but you need like champions for it. Whereas like if there literally is no access to asthma treatment for kids, like do we seriously think we're gonna let that stand? I don't know. I have a higher hope for humanity and for America than maybe I should, but that's my hope.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. We have a few minutes left. Maybe I'll take one question from our list. And Alexei said that if you do have a question that we don't address today, or you have a specific topic that you'd like covered that we didn't cover today, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and he'll pass it on to his network, and we'll either have one of our panelists get back to you, or we'll reach out to the M2D2 and UMass Lowell network to help you find an answer to that question. But there is a question related to startup founders here, which I'd like to cover. So for startup company founders that are maybe just starting out, are there a couple of things that they should be aware of in terms of the current federal cuts or Medicaid cuts in particular? And maybe another way to phrase that would be, should a What kinds of things should a startup keep their eyes on, or a company keep their eyes on, to make sure that they're understanding what's happening at the federal level? Some advice on that, Brian? Yep.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, I think the number one thing, well, there's a couple things. So obviously reimbursement, what is it today? And just start making assumptions that it's going to go down in the future. And you need to understand that if it goes down a lot, which it probably will, you still need to have a sustainable business. So if you don't think that's possible, you need to change your strategy. And I think the second one is the point I alluded to earlier, is that we're all, your competitors are resources, right? There's only so many dollars, and um, you know, everybody's sort of competing for a piece of the pie. So just understanding where your innovation lies in the mind share of whoever you're selling it to, I think is incredibly important. You could have a great innovation, but if it's not top of mind for the insurance company or not top of mind for the health system, it's probably not going to go anywhere. So I would say those two things.
Mhm. Do you have advice on how to help, how to make them top of mind, or how to bring those to light? Maybe you, Brian, and maybe Melanie with your organization. I would be interested in hear your experience with that too.
Yeah, I think you have to understand, um, really understand the customer, right? So the insurance company that's going to care about asthma is an insurance company that has a lot of Medicaid asthma patients. Um, the health system that's going to care about it is the health system that serves a lot of them. Um, it's a very, so you just really have to understand the depth, in depth, the customer and what their sort of needs are, and then you just need a broader spectrum on what's going on in healthcare. We always just keep coming back to GLP-1s because it's been a hot topic, but it's, understanding that that is a major innovation that's working its way through a lot of different channels, and that impacts everybody in very different ways because of the spend. In asthma, it's the evolution of biological therapies. So you're going from relatively inexpensive ones to now highly effective, incredibly expensive ones. So understanding, how does that shift the priorities and the attention of the people that you're talking to, is important. So I guess just in general, understanding what's going on clinically in your space, and don't be blind to the other spaces as well.
Hmm.
Hey, can I jump in on that too? Specifically, I'd say that you really have to be impactful and strongly impactful financially. Um, I don't think I can stress that enough. And it has it has to be something that I wish I could think of a concrete example specifically, but it has to have impact fast and heavy, especially now. Because otherwise you're not really going to get the attention because you're competing. Yeah, I guess the interesting thing about investing and seeing companies is that you have all these different companies doing all these different types of things, and it's they're you may be competing even though you may have a completely different product or service than another other company. You're still competing for those same dollars from the hospital or the MCO, whatever you have, so you really have to have a strong, like I said, a strong, fast impact, especially now. you know
Yeah,
uh,
you're speaking my language with understanding your user, having that impact, not only understanding the clinical benefit, but the economic story. That's all tied together. I know, Melanie, you had some thoughts as well.
Yeah, just a few things. Patients are always paying attention to what is the latest innovation in their space. And they're sharing that information with each other through their discussion forums and on social media and at conferences like our patient conference. We always try to know what are the latest innovations so that we can have the innovators come speak at the conference. Dr. McManus has spoken at our conference about digital health technology and the impact that has on AFib patients. And so we're always within the patient community sharing these kinds of things. When something doesn't get approved as quickly as we think, or if something is not getting reimbursed, We tend to mobilize the community to have conversations with their congressional representatives and with CMS, and to, send in comments through all the different comment processes that are relevant. And so patients are active when there's an innovation that they feel like is appropriate for them and necessary for them. And so patients are always going to be involved in these kinds of things. We just need to know about them.
Yeah.
I think
So
that's
not to put you on the spot, but real quick. So if someone has some exciting innovation, should they go to stopafib.org and share it with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Contact us up at the top of the page and
Okay, good.
how to get hold of us.
All right. Thanks, Dr. McManus. Go ahead.
No, I'm glad you highlighted that. But I do see patient advocacy groups being really effective in this space. And I actually think it's a gap that a lot of startups don't fully engage them in the ways that they could. They're really effective, particularly at the coverage, some of the other discussions. And I think to David Fogel's point, if you have a really impactful innovation, it can be across multiple domains. But the domain that's most compelling is the human impact of the technology at the individual. Like, it's one thing to say, I can reduce your ACO expenditures by 0.2%.
Yeah.
Whereas in lives saved and folks staying at home doing well, like those are the stories that I think can really help when it comes time to folks making investments. So I just think Melanie made a good point. I wanted to double down on it.
And I think that's a great point to end on. We're at the top of the hour, is that, yes, the economic story and the clinical story does have a huge impact on what happens with these technologies. But the human element is really the key piece. So don't forget about your stakeholders from all directions, including them as people. So I do want to thank everyone for joining this call today. Thank you specifically to our panelists for providing your perspective and your view on this complicated and ever-changing landscape that we work in, which makes it, interesting and complex and exciting and challenging, to be part of this community, which is why I love it, frankly. Thanks for everyone for joining. And we will, I don't know if Alexa, if you have anything to close with, but I'll give you a moment to jump in here. And otherwise, thank you, everyone.
No, just echoing Ilsa's comments. Thanks everyone for attending today, and thank you to all our great panelists for participating in such an insightful conversation. The event was recorded, so I'll be posting it online for anyone who wants to revisit anything. And just stay in touch. Email any questions you might think of after to mtd2@uml.edu, and we will get them to the right people and get them answered for you. All right.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a
Thanks,
great day.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.